partly it's because, obviously we've been working with police departments quite closely. And so for me, it's not just about the policies, but it's also about the implementation of those policies. And that's really what we're talking about here. And I have a list of them. I'm just going to run them down. But I do think body-worn cameras are important, but even less about just getting body-worn cameras. It's about the implementation of those body-worn cameras. So studying body-worn cameras in police departments, there are big differences between whether or not the cameras stay on the whole time or whether or not officers control the ability to turn them on. Whether or not a dispatch tells the officers to turn them on. I actually don't think people understand and realize how many things police officers have to think about when they're going out to a call. You add something new, it takes a little while to scale it up. We can talk about those things. Like, for example, police officers in certain places in Maryland are going around reporting potholes to the Department of Transportation. Like, do we want our police officers doing that, right? Do we want them filling out a report about potholes? Now, granted, I don't know about some of the streets you've been on, but some of these potholes need to be corrected. I'm not saying that. What I am saying is that I don't want my police officers necessarily focusing on those sort of things. The second thing, I do agree that implicit bias training is very important. Obviously, we do a lot of those. And the way I like to frame it, because implicit bias has been framed so negatively, even though as a sociologist who specializes in social psychology, it's like the first week when I teach social psychology, we talk about this. The term has been around since like the 1950s or something. It's not anything new. But we could call it something like human interaction training. Like, it just instantly changes what we're talking about, even though we're talking about the same thing. Third, we need to change the rules of engagement that police officers have with civilians. What that means is we, of course, need to change de-escalation, but what about the rules of engagement? So the reason why, like in the Tamir Rice situation, did those officers get sanctioned? Yes, and I'll come back to that in a second about kind of what that means and what we can do with that. But per their kind of code of conduct and how they respond, because they rushed up on him so quickly, they then had to go to a different set of rules of engagement that they actually followed. Now, we can have a problem with the fact that they ran up on him so quickly. And of course, I have a 6 and a 7-year-old, so I have all kind of feelings about this kind of stuff. But the point is that we have to change that. Fourth, I think community policing matters. I think we need to have police officers living in spaces, because part of what happens is that a lot of people in this room, we live around police officers. We work with police officers. We see them at church. We see them in grocery stores. We see them at our kids' school. People who live in neighborhoods where I grew up at never see police officers unless something has happened.
That's right.
That is a fundamental reason about why we feel like we can personally identify with police officers. And with that being said, it was a USA Today poll that I think highlighted things correctly, which is that, yes, 85% of blacks think that we need to change policing and policing behavior. There's racial bias there. But 50% of whites think the same thing, right? So what that means is 1 out of 2 white people are like, something's going on. I don't know what. Like, I think that local pressure we can actually do something about. I think that percentage is much higher than what people think. My last 3 things are very specific, but I think they're very important based on what we've seen interacting with police officers. Fifth, we need mental health services, not just for the community, but for police officers. Part of what happens is they go through a psychological eval, and it is not as strenuous as it should be. And you know what? Because if they actually come out and really talk about their feelings, they might not ever be able to police again. You gotta think, how would you feel? You've been on the force for 15 years, 5 years from now you're about to retire, send your kid to college, and if you tell them what you're really feeling in your head, that won't happen. I don't know about you, but it's gonna be difficult for me to necessarily express that. So we need outside entities to come into the police departments to actually do that evaluation so that it doesn't hold consequences for their job. 6, we need to change the source of who pays the burden of officer-involved shootings. Do you all know when there are big payouts, like in Korean Games, that was like over $30 million. Do you all know who paid that? Residents of the city of Baltimore. Baltimore already doesn't have any money. Like, just being real, it's like St. Louis, they don't have any money. Like, if you roll through those neighborhoods, like most of you probably haven't. I have. I'm from neighborhoods like that. I ride through neighborhoods like that. They don't have any money. Imagine if we change the source of that to, say, police pensions. Now, all of a sudden, when Vanessa get ready to do something, I'm like, hey, you. That's my kid going to college. You need to rethink what you're doing. It changes how they hold each other accountable. And my final thing is very important along this accountability front. Police officers get sanctioned internally all the time. We never hear about it. And we can have a conversation about whether or not that's important. Think about it. On your job, people get sanctioned internally. It doesn't become public. But it could be argued it needs to be made public. Because now all of a sudden, that holds people accountable. Because they have internal judicial boards all the time where they are demoted, where money is taken out of their pay, where they're asked to be on desk duty. And if that became public, all of a sudden it leads to a certain level of accountability, not with us to them, but with police officers as individuals with each other. And that's really what we need to get at.